Welcome to Bold Voices, Good Yarns. I'm your host, Ian Henzel. Behind every book lies an author's life story. So join me on an interactive journey as we step between the pages to explore how an author's life and their experiences have shaped the stories that we cherish and love. So sit back, relax, grab a cup of joe or a cocktail, and join me as we step between the pages. Hi, I'm Ian Henzel, and I'm the host here at Bold Voices, Good Yarns. And today we are going to be stepping between the pages with author Daniel Meltz. Daniel has two new books coming out this spring, and those two books are a novel, Rabbis of the Garden State, and a new collection of poetry, It Wasn't Easy to Reach You. So welcome, Daniel. Thanks for being on our show. So, Daniel, let's kind of jump between the pages of your life. Can you share with us, so we're shaped by our early years, our upbringing, and it makes us into many ways, it contributes to the people we are, which in turn contributes to what we create. So can you share a bit about your upbringing and how that might have shaped who you are today?
Sure. I was born in Newfoundland, Canada, but I left there pretty early on. I thought I was in the Air Force, but I spent basically all of my upbringing in Jersey in a very Jewish environment. It was pretty low middle class, and then it was pretty low class after my father left the family. But my family was very, like a lot of Jewish families, was real focused on learning. And so I got a lot of my self-worth from studying and learning and reading, and also from going to Yeshiva, because when I was 9 years old, I switched to Yeshiva, and I went to Yeshivas for grammar school and high school.
Can you explain to our listeners what a yeshiva is, for those who might not be aware?
I mean, it's a religious school. It's like a Jewish version of a Catholic school. The days are very long. You have 3 hours in the morning studying the Torah, studying the Talmud, and then you have in the afternoon, well until it's dark, you're studying all the secular subjects. And the thing that was especially exciting to me as a kid was having all these male teachers, because the religious subjects were taught by rabbis. And with my father out of the house, they became real role models and sort of idols for me, because they really liked that I enjoyed learning, and it was very repairing to have these figures in my life.
So, and rabbis have made their way into, well, the titled Rabbis of the Garden State.
Right.
Which presents a more dysfunctional view of the world. Can you talk about that a bit?
Well, we were a pretty secular family, and my mother put me into the yeshiva because they were complaining that I was not I didn't show much initiative in the public school. I was a little bored. But also, I mean, and the book is loosely based on a story about my mother. And at the time, she was involved in a scandalous affair with our rabbi. And his kids went to the yeshiva. And so she was very excited to have those worlds overlap by putting me in the yeshiva. So I think it was a happy solution for her. For me, it was very difficult because I didn't know Hebrew at the time, so it was a real challenge to me. But again, I was very drawn to all that male influence. That was very exciting to me.
Do you think as a gay man that also, or you became a gay man, do you think that all-male environment, do you think that's what was attractive about it?
Yes, and also that they valued learning. My father hated learning. He was a real Philistine and all that. So this seemed to really help with that part of my psychology. But the other thing too is, I guess conversely, as I grew up and was in that world, I became a little more religious, and I gravitated to those rabbis I wanted to place there. But the more I was involved in it, the more I realized, certainly not in Orthodox and in Hasidic Judaism, because a lot of our rabbis were Hasidic, there was no place for a gay person. So it was really very frowned upon. even though we all knew that there was stuff going on among Hasidic guys. We heard about circle jerks and things like that. But I had to sort of move away from it as I got into my late teen years.
Now, are you religious now?
No, no, but I'm very culturally Jewish. I love things Jewish. I live in New York. I love making a Seder. I love Hanukkah. But, I haven't been in a synagogue in like 40 years.
And for our listeners who aren't familiar with what a Seder is, it's a ritual. It's kind of a combination of a religious service, a meal, and a lot of fun during Passover. And in this country, it's the first 2 nights of Passover. So were there any specific moments you think in your childhood or your young adulthood that drove you to writing, that were pivotal in inspiring you to write?
I mean, I love to write just from a very early age, even from 6 and 7. For some reason, I was always writing, just sort of as an escape. And I loved comic books. I certainly didn't read literature. My favorite thing was to read novelizations of TV shows. So I loved, a novelization of Get Smart and Slipper and Gilligan's Island. That was my favorite show. But I loved writing. And when I was very young, in the 2nd grade, my mother took a story I had written. It was called A Fairy and the Little Boy. And she sent it to Random House. And of course, I got rejected. But it was so exciting. I got this letter back. Sorry, but Mr. Cerf read your book with interest, because Bennett Cerf was the publisher at the time. So I still had that letter in my strongbox because it was encouraging to me that I was taken seriously even in 2nd grade.
So, are there any aspects of your life that might surprise readers to learn influenced your creativity in your writing?
I did. Finally, when I went to college, I certainly read seriously. We had to read Ulysses, and we had to read Virginia Woolf, and we had to read all that kind of stuff. And as a result, I felt like my writing was kind of hoity-toity, and I was trying to write stuff that was really hard to understand, and I thought that made me a better writer. And I was lucky enough to go to a therapist who really challenged me on that. And I remember early on in my treatment with her, because I was depressed and confused. And I said, I want to show you a novel I'm working on, and I would like to see, maybe it might be a good way for you to get to know me better. And she read it, and then we had a discussion afterwards, and I said, so what do you think? And she said to me, well, I can see you just want me to praise you. And I'm not here to praise you. I want to talk about what was your point in this book. And it was funny. She didn't criticize, she didn't comment really, but it made me reflect on it. And I realized this stuff there was a real barrier between me and the reader. And she really opened me up to be more communicative in my writing. So that was very pivotal to me to have her. And also she had a background in publishing. So that really changed my life.
Now, you're both an author and a poet, a novelist and a poet. And Rabbis of the Garden State is your first published novel. Am I correct in that? And It Wasn't Easy to Reach You is your first published volume of poetry. When did you start writing? Have you always written poetry? Is that something new to you?
Sorry, yeah, I've always written both. I mean, I actually wrote 10 novels over the years, and sort of in the dark. I just had this urge to write. I mean, this was one I thought was the most effective one. And poetry, I've written thousands of poems. I've had lots of poems published online, in journals. It's just always been a thrill to me. And writing was just a way for me, it was a way, of course, to express myself. But it was also, especially poetry, has been a way to figure out what exactly am I feeling? Why am I upset? Why did I get so angry? Why am I feeling this gush of love and range? Spirituality. So, when you write it down in a poem, the poem is really helpful about sort of thing.
So do you think there's a synergy between your poetry and your fiction?
I mean, I guess I really love the way language sounds, and I was very conscious in writing Rabbis of the Garden State of it having sort of rhythm to it, a certain cadence. And I also learned a lot because I spent a lot of years as a technical writer, and that was also very helpful to me. It taught me how to not waste words.
So an economy
Yes.
of words,
Yeah. Yeah.
how to get something across, convey imagery, emotion, story, but with an economy of words.
One thing I also realized in the economy, a lot of times in the economy, it turns out to be fun because the quicker you say something, sometimes it makes it funny. I'm not sure why, but the best jokes are punchlines are really snappy, really short.
Well, it's rhythm,
Yeah.
and poetry definitely has rhythm.
Yeah.
Do you think that that in fiction, when you're writing fiction, in exposition, do you think that also you need to pay attention to rhythm?
Yeah. Yes. But for fiction, the most important thing to me, though, is the trajectory of the story. That because, you don't have to think about that in a poem. Although with poems, I always want to have a great last line. Like in a book, you always want to have a really good ending ending. But in the fiction, it is so much about the plot. And that's the overriding thing to me. And that's something that just doesn't come naturally. I had to study plot as a reader. Why did Dickens really spoke to me. When I first read Dickens, I was like, oh, okay, this is it finally, Dickens. Something about Dickens taught me everything. And it really is every chapter casts forward. I know they say it's because his books were serialized, so he wanted to keep the reader interested. And also, if you took the pages of his books and divided them by two, at exactly the middle, the whole story changed. It's like in a musical comedy. If you see something like Gypsy, right in the middle, she sings "Everything's Coming Up Roses," and the whole story changes. And then you're in the intermission. So that was very important to me to study the structure.
Something occurs to me because you said you've read other authors and Dickens was a favorite author, and you did analysis. Do you think that some of that's, and for our listeners who aren't familiar with Talmud, it's you're really reading intense analysis of text. So there might be one line in the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, that could go on for pages with commentary and analysis of different rabbis. Do you think that in a way that Talmudic training of diving down influenced you in how you analyzed what you were reading beyond religious work?
That is so totally. I think about that a lot too, because the Talmud is exactly what you say. You keep digging in for meaning constantly. And it prepared me for therapy because it's so playful in the Talmud. Nothing is what limits in these discussions that they have off in the sidelines. The rabbis, the schools of thought, and their commentaries. I remember one Talmud lesson we learned was about an egg that was laid on a holiday. An egg is laid on a holiday. What can you do with it? Well, you're allowed to cook. If it's the Sabbath, you really can't cook. What if it breaks? All these different things. And then I remember one commentator said, well, if you have a table and there's one uneven leg on the table, can you use the egg to prop up that leg? They said whatever came into their heads. And it might be foolish. It might be important, but that taught me a lot about how nothing's off limits and you're sort of free to associate.
But there is creative thinking in there.
Yeah.
I mean, because, you're not looking at things in a linear way. In a way, it's training in how to think and maybe a bit of lateral and creative thinking. So,
Yeah.
very, very interesting. Well, I want to ask you this, and I ask this of all of our guests. And it's a question we always end in. If you could live in when authors create books, they create worlds. Sometimes they're, speculative worlds, fantasy, or they're the real world, but they're always an invention of a world. And your favorite book might be Tale of Two Cities, but, who wants to live there? So if you could live in a book, what book would you live in?
I thought about this because it's a very good question. And I came up with Leaves of Grass by Walt Whitman. Because even though it's not a novel, it's a book of poems, but it's so wide-ranging, and his observations are full of acceptance and love and appreciation and beauty and horniness. There's everything is valid in his world. There's a ferry going across to Brooklyn. There's women should be able to vote. There's the hot man you saw across the street. Everything is in there. And I would be happy to live in that world because his consciousness is so appealing and so warm and loving. I like that.
And I think, you mentioned, and I can't remember the poem, it might be about a ferry. And he's talking about a young man on the ferry. I can't remember if it's a ferry or an omnibus, but he's talking about a young man. So it is a world. If you ignore what the social, he created his own world. And in that world, it's warm, welcoming, and sensuous. So interesting that you would live in Leaves of Grass. Well, on that note, I want to again say that today we've been in conversation and diving between the pages of the life of author Daniel Meltz, who has written Rabbis of the Garden State and a new collection of poetry. It wasn't easy to reach you. So, Daniel, I look forward. Maybe we can have another conversation again. And thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Ian. I really appreciate it.
And thank you, everyone. And please don't forget to subscribe and follow us to get the next great installment of Bold Voices, Good Yarns. You've been listening to Bold Voices, Good Yarns, brought to you by Rattling Good Yarns Press. Subscribe to our channels on Spotify and YouTube, and follow us on social media. Search for Rattling Good Yarns Press. Also, visit our website at rattlinggoodyarns.com, where you can find great reads and interesting articles about the world of books. See you soon!